Hello, Kunal Rajan. Welcome to Film Companion South, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this masterclass.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
A lot of people have a basic confusion defining your profession. What do you call yourself? A sound designer, a sound engineer?
I call myself a sound designer. A sound engineer is a broader term. A sound editor, sound
Okay.
mixer, sound recordist, they all come under the umbrella of a sound engineer. Sound designer is someone who does sound effects, sound mixing for films. Anyone who is associated with films is considered a sound designer. So I would call myself a sound designer.
Okay, so basically you design sound, which means that if you wanted to have like a bird chirping behind me during this interview, you'd create that sound.
Absolutely,
that kind of a
yeah.
thing. Okay, all right. So there is no bird chirping right now because you want to be naturalistic, right?
We can add it. Whatever you want to add, we can add it. We can make it sound like it's raining in Chennai.
Okay. So can you take a very basic scene and demonstrate what is it that you do?
Usually when we get files from the edit, our process starts when the edit is locked, when the editor and the director have finished working on their cut. And when I usually get the movie from the editor, it is in very raw format, like there is no audio work done, obviously. That's why I'm here. Let me show you a scene from, let me take a very basic scene from Vishwaroopam.
Okay.
And let me show you what it's like when we get it from the editor.
Mr. Deep, what a surprise. என்ன வேணும் கேட்டியா நிரு coffee, tea, hot chocolate, ask me.
நீ முஸ்லிமா?
What?
What ஆவத்து பூட் ஆவதா நான் சொல்றேன் அவர் அதான் இன்னும் என்ன எங்கி தெரிந்தர் மறைச்சுக்கிறே
Excuse me. எது வரலாம் நமக்குள்ள பேசிக்கலாம் மூணாம் மனுஷாளுக்கு இருக்க வேண்டாம்.
So that's usually how I get to watch the movie when I first get it.
Right. So you're basically saying there's a lot of the studio sound or the surrounding sound,
The location
there,
sound,
noise
yeah.
and location sound, and there's also the dialogues or whatever they're saying is very muffled.
Yes, absolutely. It's because it wasn't meant to be a live sync sound movie.
Right.
As you know, most South Indian movies dub the dialogues, where we bring in the actor into the studio and we re-record each and every dialogue in the movie. Unlike Bollywood movies, a lot of Bollywood movies have been doing live sync sound, but more of the South Indian movies have been doing,
Right.
They're used to dubbing. So when we get the movie like this, we start off with the dubbing. Dubbing is usually the first step.
Okay.
Let me show you the same scene with just the dubbing, without anything else, with just the dubbing.
Okay.
Ooh. Ooh. Oh. Ooh. Ooh. Ah. Ah. Mr. Deep, what a surprise. என்ன வேணும் கேட்டியா நிரு coffee, tea, hot chocolate, ask me.
நீ முஸ்லிமா?
What?
வாட் ஆவது பூட் ஆவது நான் சொல்றேன் அவர் அதான் இன்னும் என்ன என்கிட்ட இருந்து மறைச்சிருக்கேள்
Excuse me? எதுவா இருந்தாலும் நமக்குள்ள பேசிக்கலாம் மூணாம் மனுஷாளுக்கு எதிர்க்க வேண்டாம்.
So now the location sound is gone and the dialogues are clearer because they've been dubbed.
Yes. So now that the dialogues are dubbed, we don't hear any other audio. There is no sound effects. There's no sounds of Vishwanath walking in, opening the door, footsteps, none of those sounds, or even the ambient sounds.
Right.
We don't hear anything. We have to recreate each and every sound from scratch to bring
Okay.
that scene to life.
And can you show us what happened after you recreated all those sounds?
Yeah. So once the dubbing is done, then we start adding sound effects. When I say sound effects, it includes ambience, Foley sounds, all the sound effects, like the ambience of the location they're in, which is the room, or if they're outside, the outside sounds.
Right.
And then footsteps, opening the door, him placing the grocery bag on the table, the grocery bag fall. Literally each and every sound that you hear, we build each and every sound around. So let me show you the same scene without location sound, without dubbing, with just the sound effects that we created for the scene. So that's with all the sound effects. Footsteps, the doorknob, the door opening. When he opens the door, we hear a little bit of the outside world come in, and walking, the grocery bag falling, literally each and every. So I chose this scene because this is a very basic scene, and like it has just
Right.
the bare minimums where people, a common audience watching it would be like, okay, idhula enna sound, what is the big deal, like there's nothing going on, but there's so many little moving parts involved in something as simple as this.
Okay, so can you tell me the number of sounds that you added? The door opening, the knob opening?
The ambience of the scene, footsteps,
Right, yeah. That is
him,
Kamal walking in. Kamal's
Vishwanath
footsteps.
taking off his jacket, putting it on the hanger,
Okay.
placing the grocery bag on the table,
Okay.
the grocery bag falling down, and things from the grocery bag rolling on the floor. Vishwanath walking towards Nirupama. He's also playing with his gloves at that time.
So when he's playing with his glove, there's a little sound there.
There's a little bit of Foley sounds there, yeah.
Okay, okay.
So you do the once you do the dubbing, you add all these sounds, and then simultaneously the composer is also working on the score for the movie, and let me show you the music in this scene. So through the whole beginning of the scene, emotionally there is not much happening on screen, so we don't have music, and then we will hear the music start as soon as he says "Ni Muslima." So that's the music for the scene. It's a very simple cue. So we have the dubbing, we have the sound effects that were added, and then we have the music. And so these are the three basic elements of sound: dialogue, effects, and music. And that's basically sound design in a movie. You mix the dialogue, effects, and music together, and that's the soundtrack for a film.
So are you also responsible for mixing in that sound cue provided by, I assume, Shankar Ehsan Loy?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. So we get the music from the composer, and that stage is what's called final mixing. Once we've gathered all the sounds together, once the sound design, the sound effects part is done, the dubbing is done, the composing is done, and then the final stage is the final mix. That's actually the last step before the movie goes to the theaters.
Okay.
And that's the stage where the entire sound team is sitting with the director in the mixing stage, and we go over the film scene by scene, and we decide, okay, should we play the music up here? Is this this is an emotional scene? Let's bring down the sound effects, anything that's distracting, and play up the music. Or this is a fun scene, let's bring the sound. So depending on what's happening on screen, we experiment with different ideas, and a lot of important decisions get made at that final mix stage.
Mr. Deep, what a surprise. என்ன வேணும் கேட்டியா நிரு? Coffee, tea, hot chocolate? Ask me.
நீ முஸ்லிமா?
What?
வாட்டாவது பூட்டாவது நான் சொல்றேன் அவர் அதான். இன்னும் என்ன என்கிட்ட இருந்து மறைச்சிருக்கேள்?
Excuse me? எதுவா இருந்தாலும் நமக்குள்ள பேசிக்கலாம். மூணாம் மனுஷாளுக்கு எதிர்க்க வேண்டாம்.
You are creating sounds for, let's say, Kamal hanging his coat, or the grocery bag, coming and falling down. Now, would you say that these are more of subliminal cues as opposed to, let's say, a gun firing, where if the audience did not hear the gunfire, they would feel like something is off. Whereas here, they might not feel something is off if they did not hear the sound of a coat being put on a hook, or if the grocery bag rustle of the paper bag was not heard, right?
So usually, they say that when a sound designer has done his or her job right, you don't even notice them in the movie.
Okay.
We have to be
Okay.
as invisible as possible. Like anything that takes you out of the story, that means there's something wrong, you know. You
Okay.
see him carry the grocery bag in that scene, you see him put it on the table. Audience is not going to think, oh, did they record that in sound? Does it sound realistic? That's not something that should even go inside the audience mind. They should just be like, okay, he's just putting the grocery bag there. It's something psychological where if you don't hear it, you'll miss it. You have to hear it, but at the same time, it has to sound. I personally find these kind of sounds are a lot more challenging than the big action scenes or the guns. You know, I was recently watching another interview where another sound designer was talking about how sound designers obsess over doors more than any other sound, which is so true because these sounds are more difficult because everyone knows what a door sounds like. Everyone knows what a grocery bag sounds like. You know, you can't just a gun and if you there is an AK-47, if you use a slightly different gun, no one's going to know. Not everyone knows
Yeah.
how an AK-47 sounds, but these
Yeah.
everyday sounds everyone knows. So you have to make sure that they're accurate, and if it's missing, it's off. If it's not realistic, it's off. So it takes a lot of time to get these little things right.
Okay. Now, you just showed us a clip from Vishwaroopam, which you said was this part was not recorded in sync sound, and so it had to be dubbed over. Now, you've worked on films which had sync sound as well, right?
Yes.
Can you show us how your work?
So a lot of my American work is all, most of the American projects are all like sync sound. Indian movies, of all the movies I've done, Achamundu, which came out in like 2009, the movie was shot here in the US, so that was completely recorded using sync sound. And more recently, See You Soon, Mahesh Narayan's film, that was completely shot using sync sound. And the process is not very different in terms of dubbing versus sync sound. The sound effects, sound design, the thought process behind the sound design and the mix all remains the same. Logistically, you just don't need to bring in the actors into the studio because everything is already recorded.
Right.
Instead of that, you spend time cleaning up the dialogue. You know, there is always noise on set. There's traffic, or depending on the location, whatever it is, you know, you need to clean up the location sound. So instead of bringing in the actors, you just clean up the location sound. Other than that, the rest of the process is pretty much the same.
I'm going to ask you to play a clip, but before that, I'll ask you this question. There are some actors who believe that their best work comes when they do the scene live, and the full emotion that they're feeling, the dialogue that comes out while they are acting, and therefore the sync sound process is really helpful. There are other actors who feel that I think Vikram has said this, that he actually likes to improve his performance by going to the dubbing studio and kind of working on modulations and things like that. Do you have a preference for one over the other?
Not just me, but I think any sound designer would prefer live sync sound over dubbing.
Okay.
From an actor's point of view, I can see how each one has their own preference. Any sound designer anywhere in the world would always prefer to stick to live sync sound. There is a quality about it that it's very hard to recreate in post. You can try all you want, but it'll be pretty obvious that this was dubbed and this is not live sync sound. Having said that, I would rather live with dubbed audio than poorly recorded location sound. So
Okay.
it depends on who is recording the location sound, who is the recordist on set, who is the director, who is the actor, because it's something that everyone needs to cooperate. Like the director has to put an effort. If there is a shot, you shoot a shot where the performance is great, but it's a noisy take, like there's a plane passing by, or like, you know, a bus passed by during that take. Are they ready to re-record it, reshoot that one take for audio? If the director is a little more cooperative, the problem is a lot of the South Indian directors are not used to live sync sound. So this becomes something that's a lot more common in Bollywood, and Western style of filmmaking is considered a lot more effort in South India, you know. So a lot of people don't want to take the extra effort to like do an extra take. It's not that it's very noisy in India. So a lot of people say that, oh, it's too noisy, live sound is impossible.
Yeah.
That's not true, because Bollywood manages to do that. Slumdog did that in the slums. Rasul won an Oscar for that. So it's not impossible. It's just an extra step that they need to take a little bit of extra effort for that on set.
Okay. Now can we see the
Yeah,
See You Soon clip that you did?
Let me show you a clip from See You Soon. I'll start off with the raw location sound, uncleaned location sound, so you can see how location sound sounds like.
ഡിന്നർ കഴിച്ചോ?
ഇല്ല, എനിക്ക് രണ്ടെണ്ണം അടിക്കണം, എന്നാലേ കഴിക്കാൻ പറ്റത്തുള്ളൂ.
ഇയാൾ ഭയങ്കരമായിട്ട് കുടിക്കുമോ?
ഏയ്, അങ്ങനെ ഭയങ്കര കുടിയൊന്നുമില്ല. ഒരു റിലേഷൻഷിപ്പ് ബ്രേക്കായി, അത് കഴിഞ്ഞപ്പോൾ കുടിച്ചു തുടങ്ങിയത്.
Both the actors were shot in a quiet room, so it's fairly quiet. It's not too noisy. So if you listen to it, you'll hear like the lip smacks, tongue smacks, and a little bit of background noise and everything. So when we are dialogue editing this movie, we take out all the lip smacks, tongue smacks, clean it up as much as we can. Let me play you the clean dialogue for the same scene.
Okay.
ഡിന്നർ കഴിച്ചോ?
ഇല്ല, എനിക്ക് രണ്ടെണ്ണം അടിക്കണം, എന്നാലേ കഴിക്കാൻ പറ്റത്തുള്ളൂ.
ഇയാൾ ഭയങ്കരമായിട്ട് കുടിക്കുമോ?
ഏയ്, അങ്ങനെ ഭയങ്കര കുടിയൊന്നുമില്ല. ഒരു റിലേഷൻഷിപ്പ് ബ്രേക്കായി, അത് കഴിഞ്ഞപ്പോൾ കുടിച്ചു തുടങ്ങിയത്.
So that's the cleaned audio. It's a very subtle difference, but
Yeah.
if you watch it in a big screen with big speakers, you'll be able to hear see, for example, you might be shooting a scene, two actors. Forget this movie, but in another movie, when two people are having a conversation, the A side of it, let's say on actor A, would have been shot during the day, and then the other side, the opposite turnaround, would have been shot in the afternoon. So it won't match, like it'll sound very different. So we try and match it, try to make it even, try to take out all the little ticks and pops, any kind of sound to make it sound like it was recorded at that moment, the whole scene.
Okay. So I must confess that when you played this right now, I couldn't make out too much of a difference between one and the other. So like you said, maybe on the screen or maybe with a really, like when I'm watching the movie with full-on headphones and things like that, maybe that will
Yeah,
make a
absolutely.
difference,
Yeah. So this is another one of those things where if it's not done, if the dialogue is not cleaned, you'll hear the ins and outs. You'll hear it go in and out. You'll hear the noise come in. All of a sudden, noise will go out. So you'll hear it. But if it's done, if it's smooth, you won't hear it. You'll feel it flow smoothly.
Right, because I think when you showed the Vishwaroopam clip, because it was not, the dialogue, there was so much noise around it. I think what you did was much clearer to.
That was dubbing. That location sound and dubbing. That was so they have generators on set, and so that was really loud. And then when you heard dubbing, you could tell the difference. And when you're doing live sound, you try to make sure you don't have generators close by, and there is like if there's a fridge, you turn off the fridge. Anything, if there is an AC, you turn off the AC, whatever possible. So that's why I said, like, the filmmaker needs to put in a little bit of an effort in order to get good location sound on set.
Now, where do you decide where to draw the line on a sound? For example, here, the Darshana character is under a bedspread kind of thing, right? Like she's covering herself. You could choose to add the rustle of the bedspread or whatever. Or behind Roshan, you could choose to, let's say, obviously he is inside a closed space or room. So maybe there's a clock that's ticking or something like that. Just to pick like a normal sound that you can hear inside a room. How do you make the decision about, okay, this is what I need to do versus this may be too much?
It depends on the story, and it depends on what's happening with the characters at that moment in the story.
Okay.
If the bed sheets or the bed sounds add some kind of a significance to that scene or that moment, then we can emphasize a little more on that sound during the mix, Otherwise, like I said, we still record it. We would have those sounds, like if they're moving around in the bed, we would have the sounds of the beds and bed sheets and pillows and everything. In the mix, we will make a decision during the final mix whether how loud to play it or how soft to play it. If that's adding some kind of a value to the scene, if it's taking the story forward in any way, then sure. If it's not doing anything, if it's just sounds of what we see on screen, then we have it just so the audience can feel it, so they don't miss it. But we don't emphasize too much on it.
So you showed us what both the scenes that you showed us were inside, like interior scenes. One was inside the living room of a house, one was inside the bedroom and some other room. So these are relatively naturalistic. I mean, you're kind of limited by the number of sounds you can show, right? In ambient sounds, because you can't, like, maybe at max you can show a plane flying overhead or something like that, but you can't really design too much around it, I guess. Whereas, can you give us an example of something where, like a scene that went a little bigger and where you could add your creativity and bring out certain aspects of the scene that subliminally that was not there in the shot itself?
Sure. Let me actually, I can show you three different examples. Let me start off with See You Soon since we are here.
Okay.
As you know, the entire movie happens within a computer screen, and the entire movie it's full of mouse clicks. The sound-wise, it's mouse clicks, keyboard typing, scrolling through the screen. Everyone knows what a mouse click sounds like. Everyone knows what typing on a keyboard sounds like. We try to keep it interesting. We try to be a little more over the top than real life. So instead of just using a normal mouse click and a keyboard typing, we try to layer it with more sounds, like to give it that extra feel. Because you're watching a movie, you want to exaggerate things a little bit, not too much, but if you exaggerate too much, people will know this is not a keyboard typing sound or this is not a mouse click. But when I play with a mouse click and keyboard typing, you'll realize that you wouldn't have even realized it while watching the movie how many layers were playing for each keyboard typing and mouse clicks. Let me show you.
Okay. Are you showing right now? Are you going to show us the before or the after?
With See You Soon, before I worked on it, it's just a computer screen with no sounds.
Oh, okay. Okay. So what you're showing us now is after you did the slight exaggerated mouse click that you said.
I'll show you layer by layer. I'll go step by step, so it might be easier. So here is the entire scene, the See You Soon. So this small window that you see, the desktop, that's the movie, and these are my tracks. Let me play you the scene the way it was in the movie.
Okay.
So that's just 2 mouse clicks and a few keyboard typing sounds. And if you look at it, for each of the mouse clicks, I have like 3 different layers. Let me play you each layer at a time. It's layer 1. Here is layer 2. And here is layer 3. So these 3 layers make up the sound of each mouse click in the movie.
Okay.
And here's the keyboard typing, layer 1. Layer 2. Layer 3. Layer 4. When you play all these layers together, it sounds like this.
That's fantastic. There's also a little pause, because typically what happens is when, at first, sometimes we take a little pause between keystrokes. So that pause is also kind of built in, right?
So it's all done in sync to what the character is typing on screen. Jimmy, the character, he's typing his username, password. So depending on how many letters he types, I edit the number of typing.
Number of things. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was fantastic because you're kind of, so when you say exaggerate, it is so that it is not that, it's just so that there is a little bit of dramatic effect in the typing itself.
To keep it a little more cinematic and keep it a little more interesting, if the keyboard and the mouse, the topmost layer of both, if I had used just that one layer, that would have been totally fine. It would have sold it. Nobody would have questioned it or nobody would have asked for more. But this just keeps it a little more interesting. So when I have 4 layers playing for the keyboard, what I do is sometimes in another scene, I may not use all the 4 layers. I might mute 2 of the layers and just use two layers. And for other scenes, I may use 3 layers so that it sounds just a little bit different in every scene so the audience doesn't get tired of hearing the same thing over and over again.
Okay.
Especially this movie, since everything is on screen, you don't want to you want to try to be as less monotonous as possible.
This film is a special case, but in theory, could the same dramatic effect have been produced through a small stretch of background music?
When you say background music, what do you mean?
You know, the score, like something playing, like music playing, like an ominous score or something like that.
Sure, you can. Music underscores the emotion in a scene, but that
Right.
wouldn't change. Like in this particular example, like it wouldn't change the typing or the mouse clicks. So the mouse clicks and the typing still stay the same throughout the movie. To make it easier, like Vishwaroopam, for example, like the guns. Let me use guns as an example. There's a whole Afghan war sequence that happens, the interval block in part one. It's a 7-8 minute war sequence where everyone's shooting. Like there's AK-47s, there's Uzis, there's a Black Hawk, there's the Chinook. There's so many different kinds of helicopters, guns. So at that time, we did a lot of research into what each gun sounds like. So, for example, in AK-47, we used authentic AK-47 sounds, but we also layered it with other guns to keep it a little more interesting, to make it a little more cinematic.
Okay.
Let me show you again. Let me show you how that sounds.
Okay.
Just using an AK-47 by itself would have sold it, but
Okay.
giving it a little more, adding a few more layers gives it a little more larger than life, cinematic feel.
Okay.
Let me show you.
Okay.
So this is the real authentic sounds of the gun that as you see it. This is not what ended up in the movie, but this is just the authentic sounds, what I'm about to play. If you look at it, that works. Let me show you what actually ended up in the movie. Again, it's a marginal difference, but it beefs up the guns a little more. It makes it a little more cinematic, a little more larger than life. No one's going to say that, oh, that doesn't sound like an authentic AK-47. Maybe some people who are used to shooting at a shooting range, they could probably tell the difference. But even for all these guns, the base sound that we used is the authentic gun itself.
Okay.
It's just we add sweeteners on top of it to beef it up a little more.
Okay. Okay. Now, you said you did a lot of research on the gun sounds. Aren't there like sound libraries that have these sounds already?
Yeah, we have, all sound designers have a large library. Like if you look at I have over like 5 to 6 terabytes of sound effects. So for any given movie, we get to choose from, like, even if you, let me show you a sample.
Okay.
So this software, it's called Sound Miner. This is where we search for sound effects. So this goes through our database and looks for sounds. So for example here, let me show you. You can go up top and type in whatever you want. Like let's say, for example, door open. So you get thousands of options. There's one. There's another. So gate open. There's some gate open sounds. Let's say you want to type tiger. So we have, for any given sound, we have like thousands of options, but it so happens that you always end up having trouble finding the perfect sound. Even though you have thousands of options, every movie is unique and you can't reuse the same sounds over and over again. So finding the right sounds is always a challenge.
Okay.
And that's actually what our job is, to make sure that we find the right sound for any given scene, and we do it however we can achieve it, either from a sound library. If we don't have, like, for example, like a car, like if there is a very specific kind of a car, like a Ferrari or a McLaren, they have very specific sounds. And if we see the characters zooming around in them at a certain speed, and if we don't have that particular car in our library at that particular speed, then we look into options. We see if we can buy it, buy the sound effects library, from somewhere. If that's not available, then we see if we can go actually record the car. If we see that specific car for a few more scenes in the movie, then it might be worth recording it live.
Okay.
So we do whatever it takes to get the sound right. With all these sounds, you can basically make anything sound like anything. You know, you have an ambassador car, you can make an ambassador sound like a Ferrari if you
Okay.
wanted to. And for someone who hasn't heard what an ambassador sounds like, who knows? They might even buy it. I mean, maybe not a Ferrari, but something a little more realistic.
Yeah.
I can even make you sound like however you want. Like if this was a horror movie or something, and if I wanted to make you sound a little more demon-like, I have like a whole demon library where I can make you sound a little more scary, and you know.
So, Kunal, one of the things that we hear about a lot in sound design is the word Foley. Tell us what it is and explain to us what it is.
Foley is the process of recording sounds in a studio in sync to picture.
Okay.
Foley is recorded specifically for a movie. Like for example, like Vishwaroopam that I showed you, gunshots or like AK-47s. We can't record AK-47 inside a Foley studio every time we need a gun. But like let's say someone's walking, footsteps, or sitting down in a chair, grabbing a phone, dropping a piece of paper on the ground, something a human makes, something stuff like that, we record live in sync to video for each movie, fresh and specific for that particular movie.
Okay.
And that process is called Foley, where
Okay.
we have a Foley artist watching the screen and recreating the same sounds using the props and shoes or whatever needed.
Okay.
Let me show you a little bit of behind the scenes of how we record Foley at a Foley stage.
Okay. Which is this film?
I have some behind the scenes footage from when we recorded the Foley for Mercury.
Okay.
Let me show you how a Foley stage looks like and how. So this is actually a scene in the second half of the movie where Prabhudeva's character is touching some test tubes and glass. So we have our Foley artist playing with glass in the Foley stage. Let me show you how it looks.
Okay.
So that was all the glass Foley. I'll show you the footsteps for the exact same scene.
Okay.
And here's how the final scene turned out. So when you saw the Foley artist and the recording the glass or the footsteps, that's for one specific prop. The glass was like one specific prop. Like that we need to record each and every prop that you see on screen. Or footsteps was for Prabhudeva's character. The same process is done for each and every character walking on screen. We layer all these things with the sound effects that we cut to. Like for example, the glass breaking, the test tubes falling down or stuff like that. We have a layer of Foley and then we add another layer of sound effects that we find in our library to sweeten it, to make it a little more beefier.
Why can't you just use a library sound for this? I'm sure your library has glass breaking sounds, right?
Yeah.
So why should you have a live person looking at the screen and trying to mimic that exact sound, which is a lot of effort? What is the difference between doing that and taking your library and searching for glass breaking effects and using that?
Because you're never going to get the exact same action that the actor is doing on screen.
Okay.
Like this particular example, Prabhudeva's character is touching through the test tubes very slowly, and
Okay,
his hands are flowing through the screen. If you look, so when I showed you my sound database, you look through the library, every time you search for something, 1,000 options show up. Even if you, by the time you listen to like 20 of them, like, you know, you've lost an hour. And when are you going to find the exact sound of a hand touching a test tube flowing through so many test tubes? Maybe you might have it, you may not have it.
Okay.
But it's just quicker to just record it live.
Okay.
So because finding sounds or even finding something similar to a hand touching a glass and trying to piece it together is possible. We can do it. But when we can record live Foley, why would we waste
Right.
so much time trying to find the perfect sound and sync it up to the screen, spend like hours to just do one small stretch of the movie, you know? We have a 2 hour or 2.5 hour movie to do. And if we waste like 3-4 hours on one small thing, then we're never going to get the movie done in time.
So how long does it take to do a 2.5 hour movie? How long does it take to do that? I'm sure it varies according to the requirements, but in general, what is the time you spend?
I've completed a film, feature film from start to finish in as little as 3 weeks.
Okay.
I've also taken 6 months to do a film. Depends on how much time the producer is willing to give us, or whether they've announced the release. If it's a Tamil film, have they announced the release date? Do we have a deadline? You know, you've seen these little details. It takes time to like do all these things, and it takes time to like build these sounds. And the more time we get, the more time we can spend on these little details.
Are you usually the kind of person that somebody comes to at the very last minute and says, I'm sorry, but we have just 2 weeks. Can you do this for us?
That happens all the time.
Yeah.
That's the story of my life. That's something that sound designers hear literally every day.
Okay.
We have X amount of time. We need this done. And we're used to it. I think everyone's used to it now by this point.
Okay, so you just end up spending a few sleepless nights and get it done. Right?
Yeah. Especially towards as we get closer to the release date, there's a lot of sleepless nights.
Because you're also
Sometimes it's fun, depending on the team you're working with, depending on who you work with, and the director, the rest of your sound team. It could be fun. The last minute tension and the last minute scramble. If you're not working with the right people, if the people you're working with are stressful, then it can make things really a nightmare.
Now, Kunal, does the sound mix stay the same when the film is coming to OTT? Because when you are doing all this complicated and complex work, you're creating it for a theater that is hopefully equipped with, now we have all these right speakers and left speakers and behind the screen speakers and behind our head speakers and all those, the Dolby, whatever. So you're creating it for that, right? Because you want a certain amount of sound to come from this. If there's a helicopter, you want it to travel from here to here so that we get this, sound of a helicopter literally going over our heads and all that. Is there something that you have to transform when the same film goes to OTT? Is there a change?
Yes, absolutely. Most of the process remains the same, like creating the sounds, finding the sounds, placing them, all that remains the same. What changes is the final mix. When you're mixing something for theatrical, you have a much wider dynamic range to play with. You can have something sound really soft, like for example, a pencil dropping. Someone drops a pencil on the floor. You can have that sound really soft in contrast to an explosion, which is extremely loud. You can go from a really soft sound to a really loud sound because you're in a controlled environment, you're in a theater.
Yeah.
But when your movie is going to an OTT platform, you can't do that, because then when there is a quieter sequence, people are going to take their remote and turn up their volume. And then when the next scene, let's say we cut from that to the following scene, which is a louder action scene, then again they're going to take their remote and turn down their volume. We don't want people turning up, turning down every 5 minutes, We want them to leave it at one volume and just enjoy the rest of the movie. So when you know that your movie is going to OTT, we have less of a dynamic range to work with. we need to make sure it's a little more consistent. So in this example, what we would do is the sound of a pencil dropping would be, we would mix that a little bit louder, and the sound of an explosion would be a little bit softer.
Okay.
So that they're, obviously they won't be at the same level, but the difference between these two sounds won't be as big as it would have been if it was a theatrical mix.
Okay.
And all these platforms, they also have a lot of specifications, be it Netflix or Amazon. They give you like 3 or 4 pages of specs that you need to adhere to. Like, you have to follow their guidelines, and it can't be below this, it can't be over this, you have to stay within this range, and the dialogue has to be here. And they give you a lot of guidelines that you need to follow, so that not only within our movie we stay consistent, but they also want it to stay consistent between programming. So when you're watching one movie on Amazon, and when you halfway through the movie you skip to another movie, you decide to watch another movie, they still want the volume and everything to remain the same. So we have to follow a lot of those guidelines when we deliver for these OTT platforms.
So it's kind of like there's one stage that you do for the film's theatrical release, and then when this film is sold to OTT, or you kind of say, okay, these things need to be looked at again, so you have to do that all over again.
That's the right way to do it. For example, See You Soon, the final mix happened in India. Vishnu Govind did the mix in Kerala, and even before we started the mix, we knew that this was going to Amazon. So right from day one, it was mixed to that spec.
Right.
But if you take a movie like Petta, for example, Petta was mixed for theatrical, and it's pretty loud, and it wasn't mixed to Netflix or Amazon specs. So even now, when you go to Netflix and watch Petta, you will see that Petta sounds much quieter than some of Netflix's other programming, because it was mixed really loud because it was mixed for theatrical. But Netflix has their own algorithm that makes it softer. Because it was so loud, it automatically puts a compressor on it and makes it quieter. If it was mixed for an OTT, or if it was remixed, or if we had another version for a Netflix or Amazon, it would have sounded a little different.
Okay. Now, what is your relationship with background music? I have to know this because, personally speaking, I think that in India we have been a little over-reliant on background music to manipulate the audience's emotion, and under-reliant on the natural sounds and the performers, because we always think that if a scene needs to be elevated, the first thing to do is to pump up the background music. That's how I've seen it. How do you see it?
I think it's a personal choice. There is no right or wrong. It's a very subjective medium, as you know. I worked with filmmakers who prefer their music louder. I've also worked with filmmakers who like it the other way. In general, Indian movies have very loud music. The music is mixed pretty loud. Kind of like how Nolan mixes his music. When you watch any Nolan movie for that matter, the music is blaring. It's in your face. I personally enjoy it. It comes down to taste and what the filmmaker wants, and also sometimes the kind of film. For example, Kamal sir is one of the fewer filmmakers that I've worked with from India who prefers the music to be very subtle, underscore the scene, and keep it really low. If you watch Vishwaroopam, you'll see that a lot of the music, except for 1 or 2 scenes, most of the scenes, the music actually plays a lot lower than usual. Even Uttama Villan, for that matter, compared to a director like Karthik Subbaraj, be it Mercury or Petta, Karthik prefers the music a little bit on the louder side. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with either or. It's just their personal preference. And the way I look at it is, end of the day, it's the director's movie. They wrote it, they imagined it, they shot it, they made it. It's their movie, and I'm here to make their dream
vision
come to life, their vision come alive. And if they want it a certain way, great.
Can you give us an example of a scene where you integrated your work with a background score? You just talked about 2 approaches. One is Kamal's approach, one is Karthik Subbaraj's approach. Do you have an example from any of those films that combine this with the background score, combine your work with the background score?
Yeah. I'll show you a scene from Petta. Usually, I always like to work with the composer right from day one.
Okay.
It's always a better idea, before Petta, like a movie like Mercury, a horror film. Let's say there's a scary scene, and as a sound designer, I'm working on some scary sounds for that scene. The composer might be working on some scary sounds for that same scene simultaneously, and you don't want both these sounds to clash during the final mix. So what I did was, once I got through my sound design pass of any specific reel, I would send it to Santosh, and Santosh would hold on to that as a reference while he's composing music, or if he finished a reel earlier than me, he would send me his music, and I would use his music as a reference when I'm doing the sound effects and sound design, so that we don't clash, but we try. The goal is to try and complement each other. It's important how the sound and the music blend together in the mix, and how you mix it together. That could totally change the way you feel about a scene. I'll show you a scene from Petta. This is a scene where superstar comes to meet. He meets Simran for the first time in the rain. It's a romantic scene. He's walking with the umbrella, slow motion. A scene like that, you hear the rain. He opens the gate and all those sounds. You want to hear it, but you just want to feel it, because you want to stay with the character. You're in a mood. It's a romantic scene, and what's going to carry the emotion in that scene. Hear all the sounds, whether it's the rain, the gate opening, but they're all so subtle, and we let the music take over that scene, because that's what gives you the emotion. You any scene, the way you mix it, like when you're in the mixing stage with the director, trying to decide what should play louder and what should play softer, it comes down to what's helping tell the story of that scene better.
Right.
And in this specific scene, it's the music. If I brought down the music and if I brought up the sound effects, that scene wouldn't feel as impactful as it does. For example, like when he's walking in slow motion, footsteps, like we don't hear footsteps. When we record Foley, we would record it, but even while recording it, I know that, like, okay, this is something that's going to get muted when we are in the final mix, but we just hold on to it just in case we come up with some crazy idea during the mix. So we have it. So I'll show you the same scene with the music a lot lower.
Okay.
And the sound effects louder. Not a big change, just the same stuff. Just the only difference will be the music will be lower and the sound effects will be louder.
Okay.
And you'll see how the scene feels very different.
Both the versions, I think I prefer the second one, just because I know I feel there's a little more air in that scene. There's a little more.
Oh, really?
Breathing space in that scene. It's like, yeah, I guess it's a personal preference. There's a little more, the scene breathes a little more, I guess. But I completely understand, because it's romance comes out best in music, and
Yeah.
when this particular scene is driven by that emotion. So yeah.
And it also goes back to what you were asking previously about the see you soon scene, about the bed sheets and the pillow covers. How do you emphasize on how do you know what to emphasize on? It's in this version, if you see him walking the footsteps or opening the gate, you hear everything, but what is it adding to the scene? What is it adding to the story? Not much, technically.
Actually, I would argue.
At this point, it's, I think, a personal choice.
I guess I would argue with that, because that gate opening is a very iconic Rajni moment callback from Abura Ragangal. So for
Yes.
this scene, this particular instance, I would think that the gate opening is like an important thing. But I get what you're saying totally.
Actually, yeah, like I said, it's a personal choice. If there is a conflict, like if as a sound designer, if I have a certain way I want to mix a scene, or if somebody else has a different way they want to mix the scene, I think end of the day it all comes down to what the director wants and how the director
absolutely.
wants that scene to sound.
Yeah. And also you have to consider the audience, because for the longest time they've been trained a certain way to watch a film, and suddenly if you just change that grammar, like for example in Before Sunrise, those movies, you completely feel the romance without this huge score, right? It's like, because it's just in the way they talk, the way they walk, the acting and everything like that. So, but then you can't do that completely here, because here romance is automatically associated with background music. So that's also part of
Yeah.
the whole deal. So finally, I want to ask you, how much of, we just spoke about the audience, how much of your work actually reaches the audience? Because at the beginning you said that a sound designer has really done his work if the audience cannot, if it's as invisible as possible. So are you always going to be like, unless there's an interview like this, are you always going to be somebody who's like, whose work is not very well known outside of the technical crew of the team?
Yes, and I'm okay with that, because like I said, like if I'm invisible, if they don't notice the sound, then I think I've done my job well. But to answer your previous question about whether it reaches the audience, all the work that we do, I don't know if it reaches the audience the way we want it to reach the audience. And I think it comes down to how well the theaters are calibrated and maintained.
Right.
Only about 20 to 25% of the theaters in Tamil Nadu are maintained well and calibrated the way it should be. And this is not just an issue with sound alone, it's also picture. Picture also doesn't look, the visuals don't look as good as they should look. For example, I did this movie, I worked on this movie called Kalyana Samayal Sadam
Right.
a few years ago. And I remember the opening, we mixed the film here in LA, and on opening day, there's two producers in the film. One producer was in Chennai and the other producer was here in New Jersey when the movie released. I remember on opening day, the producer watching it in Chennai called me and said, எல்லாம் நல்லா இருக்கு, நல்லா இருந்துச்சு தியேட்டரில், டயலாக் மட்டும் ரொம்ப கம்மியாக கேட்டுச்சு. I'm like, oh, அப்படியா தெரியலையே. The same day, few hours later, the producer from New Jersey watched it. என்னம்மா டயலாக் மட்டும் தான் கேட்டுச்சு தியேட்டரில், வேறு சவுண்ட் எஃபெக்ட்ஸ் மியூசிக் வேறு எதுவுமே கேட்கல. So it's the same movie, same mix, and it's just because theaters are not calibrated as often as they should be, and they're not maintained well, and it kind of is frustrating. That's why I think, I personally prefer like mixing for OTT platforms where you have like specs and like you have like guidelines of like, this is where you need the audio to be, you need to be within this range, and so everyone kind of gets the same thing. There are specs and guidelines for theatrical mixes as well, but not a lot of people follow it.
Okay.
The theaters turn down the volume because the mixes are loud. Because theaters turn down the volume, sound designers and mixers keep mixing louder and louder to compensate for people turning down the volume, and in this whole loudness war, like, our work kind of gets affected.
Oh, that's kind of sad, but I guess at least the least we can do is try and seek out the theaters that are better, that have better sound quality, so that it's especially for the films that kind of deserve that kind of sound. I said that was the last question. I just have one last audience question, because we're still talking about theaters and audience. From a sound designer, give us expert advice. If I were to choose a seat in a theater to get the best sound experience, typically somebody chooses the center seat. Is that the right way to go about it?
Yes, I'm glad you asked this, because a lot of people usually try and get the seat up against the wall.
Okay.
I would never sit up against the wall, like in the back, like A row. Usually A row is the one that's up against the wall. I would never pick that, because usually in the corners, in the backmost row, you hear a lot more bass.
Okay.
Which, not in a good way, but not the way it's intended to sound. So I would always, the sweet spot where it's calibrated is 1/3 of the way from the back in the center of the screen.
Wow. So
Yeah.
that's so.
One third of the way from the back, not exactly in the center of the
Center.
screen.
Okay,
A little bit back towards the wall. So I would say like 1/3 from the back wall,
Wow.
2/3 of the way from the screen.
And in the center.
In
of
the
the
center.
Row, of
In
the
the
row.
center, yeah, in the center. I think that's the sweet spot for sound. That's where usually they calibrate.
Okay.
When speakers are calibrated, that's the spot where they calibrate too. So that's usually the best place to sit in a movie theater.
Okay. So the number of rows divided by 3, and then back from there. And
Approximately.
Then there's a I'm just kidding. So, but thank you so much, Kunal. This has been a great educational session, and thank you for showing us these clips, because these kinds of sessions, they work best when you give examples, and really, really glad you could make the time all the way from LA. So all the best for your work, and thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me. Hope it was helpful.
It was. Thank you.